Hello you and welcome to eSpace, the entrepreneurship space, here at the University of Geneva in Switzerland for the Global Entrepreneurship Week 2020. So in a few minutes, we will have Beatrice Scarioni joining us for a masterclass on the topic of Tech for Impact. Beatrice is a head of Tech for Dev at EPFL's Vice Presidency for Innovation. But before we go into this specific masterclass, let me remind you of the topic of the whole day, which is basically how can society adapt to disrupted industries? And the masterclass of Beatrice will address this question in a specific way, which is that basically in some ways, technology can also be a force for good in disrupted ecosystems, especially in developing nations. But before that, let's go for a little virtual housekeeping. If you're following us live right now, you may want to actually just click on the button you might have, for example, on the website of the Global Entrepreneurship Week that says Interaction Live. By clicking on this button, you can join directly the webinar that we have set up for the occasion and therefore ask your questions directly into it. If you are, for example, on our website, just go and register for the session and you will get a link immediately to just join the webinar. So please do it so that you can ask your questions and interact with us. So I think that now we're a bit ready to go to the core of the masterclass. Beatrice, are you with us?
Yes, hello Mael, nice to be with you today.
A pleasure. So the floor is yours for your masterclass. Thank you a lot.
Great, thank you everyone. It's good to be here with all of you. Thank you Mael for the invitation and thank you for the opportunity to be presenting what we do in the Tech for Impact space at EPFL, more specifically for Tech for Dev program. So today's let's say masterclass is going to be divided into three main parts. In the first part, I will really explain what we do at EPFL in the Tech for Impact ecosystem. In the second part, I will go more into detail and explain the Tech for Dev program that was launched last year. And the third part, and to my opinion, the most important part, I will go into lessons learned. What does it mean to create a tech for good ecosystem in a place like Switzerland, in an academic institution, what we've done and where we still have to go. But before I go into the EPFL perspective, I want to give you just a sort of 30,000 foot level as to what the world looks like today and what it will look like in 10 years' time. So many of you are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We have 10 years to go in order to, in theory, achieve all the 17 goals. But unfortunately, there is still a lot of things we have to do, and there's still a massive gap in terms of investment. So in order to achieve the SDGs, if we continue at this rate, we're still missing 2.5 trillion US dollars. This capital needs to be mobilized by the private sector or other stakeholders. But in order for us to achieve the SDGs 10 years down the line, we really need to mobilize more capital as soon as possible. So what does the future look like? I think many of you listening are millennials or Generation Z. And I think it's very powerful what the former United Nations Secretary General said. He really states that we are the first generation to be able to end poverty and the last generation that can actually take steps to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And we are accountable because future generations will judge us depending on our moral and historical responsibilities. So we have to act now. The time is now, just as Ban Ki-moon said, and just as another prominent figure has done. So you're all familiar with Greta. She has really done an incredible job about mobilizing different students, stakeholders, around the theme of climate change. And she really, at the World Economic Forum annual meeting, really used this very, very powerful sentence. We have to act as if our house was on fire. So what does the future look like? I took some specific examples of global and environmental issues, and I want to start with the first one, which is the plastic issue. Some of you may know that plastic pollution is currently in a very, very bad state. If we continue polluting as much as we are polluting, by 2025, for every ton of plastic, we'll have 1 ton of plastic for every 3 tons of fish. So we have a ratio of 1 to 3. If we continue at this rate, by 2050, we'll have more plastic than fish in the ocean. This is data from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, one of the most prominent circular economy think tanks in the world. And I also found the cover of National Geographic magazine, which is extremely powerful, that states that we have currently 18 billion pounds of plastic that end up in the ocean every year. And we know the plastic issue is entirely man-made because plastic did not exist, for example, as early as the 1950s or 1960s. So some of you may know what this is. This is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Unfortunately, it's a plastic island. It's as big as, I think, the United States of America, located in Southeast Asia. And maybe some of you have traveled to these places when it was still possible to travel. And you really see how an issue like plastic pollution is really tangible when you travel to such locations. Again, maybe some of you know what this picture is. It's a satellite imagery picture. It's taken in Cox's Bazar refugee camp. It's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, refugee camp in the world, with Rohingya refugees that have fled nearby countries to actually find refuge in Bangladesh. I think over 700,000 people are living in a very small and confined area. And with our program Tech for Dev, we have one of our projects which specifically tackles an issue in the Cox's Bazar refugee camp. If I just have to continue in this positive streak, this is a very powerful photo, in my opinion. It's all the plastic that is contained in the body of an albatross bird. So this is all the plastic that, unfortunately, this albatross has eaten. And the photographer has done a really nice job into sort of capturing this in a picture. But I talked about plastic pollution, I talked about the refugee crisis and other sort of global issues, but I think we've also come quite far. I don't know if some of you recognize a person in this picture. Unfortunately, he passed away not a few years ago. If you haven't read his book, I would invite you to read it. It's incredibly powerful. It's Hans Rosling and his book Factfulness. So he does a very good job at actually getting statistics and data on world issues and actually making them comprehensive and showing what the progress has been throughout time. So if we think on a more positive note, how far have we come until today? So if we look at two specific elements, for example, hunger or children dying or premature birth, we've seen that the percentages have really decreased exponentially throughout time in both cases. Once again, if we take another data point, we find especially mobile phones and people who actually own a mobile phone has also increased exponentially, and this is extremely important, especially in continents like the African continent, where mobile phones are incredible innovation tools which can actually bring people and make them financially independent. Then if we look at solar panels, for example, the price per solar panel module has incredibly decreased. So you see a lot of like solar power and clean tech all over the world, from more developing countries to less developing countries. So moving towards a renewable future is more and more possible. One of the examples I like to use about how far we've actually come is using the M-Pesa example. I personally say it's the first virtual currency. Bitcoin was not the first virtual currency, M-Pesa was the first virtual currency. It was founded in 2007 in Kenya, and I find it pretty amazing that 42% of the country's GDP actually flows through this mobile money app. So 20 million subscribers in Kenya and outside of Kenya use M-Pesa to pay for groceries, energy, and other things. They have completely leapfrogged everything that is like a bank account, a bank card, which we have, for example, in Switzerland, and moved directly to mobile money. And it is incredible how this technology, born in a place like Kenya, has then been exported back to Europe. So you have sort of this innovation process which goes the other way around. So this was to sort of set the context a little bit, so we can go into the first part as to how an academic institution like EPFL is catalyzing the Tech for Impact ecosystem, specifically in Switzerland and outside of Switzerland. I will just briefly talk about EPFL as a federal technical institution, and then go more specifically into what we do through the Tech for Impact and Tech for Dev program. So as you know, EPFL is one of the two federal universities alongside ETH Zurich. They can be considered brother and sister, and they have three missions which are very much interlinked: education, research, and innovation. There are around 11,000 students at EPFL. We have around 2,000 PhD students, 370 labs, and we host around 60 startups and 25 companies at the Innovation Park, which have their R&D offices based there. EPFL is also a very, very young university. If you compare it to US universities such as Stanford or MIT, or even European long-standing universities, EPFL can be considered a baby. It's only, and I say only, 50 years old. It just celebrated its 50th anniversary last year. So in this time frame, it has undergone a really fast-paced development. And you can see what the land that today hosts the campus looked like back in 1969. So EPFL is also an extended campus. We have the main campus, which is located in Lausanne, but we have antennas, which are based in Geneva. At Geneva, we have the campus biotech, everything that is neuroprosthetics, robotics, brain-machine interface. There's really some exciting things happening at Geneva at the campus biotech. And then we have dedicated sites which focus on sustainability issue, materials and others that are located in Neuchâtel, Fribourg, and Sion as well. So EPFL can really be considered an extended campus throughout the French part of Switzerland. It's also located in a strategic area, the Lake Geneva area, with many of the international organizations being headquartered in Geneva, and many of the academic institutions and other actors, such as the SCHUV, that are located in Lausanne. So many call, let's say, this part of Switzerland as this sort of tech for good space. As I said, just to give you some more statistics, EPFL is very much a research-driven university. There's many, many PhDs working, around 2,000 of them working on research, around 344 faculty. We have 5 schools, 2 colleges, and around 370 research labs working on domains such as drones, life sciences, engineering, chemistry, everything that is sort of under the technical engineering domain. Just to give you sort of an overview of the different schools, we have the ENAC, which is more on environment and architecture, the computer science school, the engineering school, the 2 colleges, which are the College of Management and the Collège des Humanités. And we also have interdisciplinary centers, so centers that are centered around food, mobility, robotics, that work on also very interesting multidisciplinary projects. As I said, we have sort of robotics, neurosciences, tech for impact, which is the team I am part of, sports technology, data science, digital trust, you name it. So these are all the interdisciplinary centers which are based on the EPFL campus. So if we have to move to innovation, this was a ranking published by Reuters about the world's most innovative universities last year. EPFL ranked quite well, 17th in the world. You have sort of the usual suspects taking first, second, and third place, universities based in the US, which are doing some amazing things in this domain. And also, in terms of innovative universities in Europe, EPFL is also quite highly ranked, fourth in total after sort of Imperial College and others, especially in the Netherlands. So what does innovation mean in a place like EPFL? I was also surprised to see this data before I actually joined the Tech for Impact team 3 years ago, but there's lots of happening at EPFL. It's very much an entrepreneurial and innovation ecosystem with over 130 inventions and 98 patents, which are filed every single year. In terms of startups and spin-offs created, it's over 23. And the figure, which is also quite interesting, is the venture capital which is raised by these startups. And it represents less than a third of the total venture capital which is invested in Switzerland. So where does this happen? So the EPFL campus is a big campus. So we have a section of the campus which is called the Innovation Park. That is where the company R&D offices are located and where all the startups are housed. And the EPFL Innovation Park was built especially in order for the startups and the companies to sort of interact with the researchers, the students, and the labs in order to profit from the innovation and the technology coming out of the EPFL campus. Once again, if you want to go more specifically into the venture capital raised in Switzerland, in the different parts of Switzerland, we can see that Zurich and Geneva are very sort of closely tied. Zurich around 36% of all the venture capital that has been raised in Switzerland, closely followed by everything that is in the Arc Lémanique in the French part of Switzerland, with a total of 6,925 million in terms of venture capital raised for the period 2013 to 2019. So what does EPFL do to sort of catalyze innovation and empower the next generation of engineers? So there are different grant programs and student programs which we have in place, which sort of help researchers and students start their own social venture and get off the ground. The most recent one is the Changemakers program, which was launched in last month, who is managed by my colleague Alessandra. And this really enables a student, EPFL bachelor and master students with sort of small grants to actually start their and kick off their ventures whilst still studying. Then we have specific programs targeted for EPFL researchers, which are both the Enable program and the InnoGrant program, in order for researchers to explore market and assess the technology, which is more sort of in line with the product they want to develop. The InnoGrant is specifically tailored to EPFL labs. It's, let's say, a yearly salary in order for the researchers to sort of continue the research they undergo on campus. As I said, the Changemakers program was called previously the X Grant program. We have 30 grants that we have given, 11 in terms of the InnoGrants, and as I said before, 23 spin-offs and startups that get created every year. In terms of the funding raised by EPFL startups, we're around 250 million as to the money that they raised. And we also have sort of camps and opportunities for students to go into San Francisco, London, and Berlin. I mean, we had, I guess, given COVID situations, we'll have to reassess things, but we sort of had these possibilities for students to go and sort of in these ecosystems to know what it means to set up companies there as well. So these are just two of the EPFL success stories and startups that have both won an X grant. So the Motion Pilot is actually a student-led venture, and the Creal 3D is actually an Inno grant, which is 2017. You might have heard of the first EPFL unicorn. It's a startup called Mind Maze by Tej. They create virtual reality and assisted reality for hospitals and rehabilitation centers. So they have been sort of baptized as the first EPFL unicorn. They're based in Switzerland and they're based in the US as well. So why was Tech for Impact created? I find this art piece quite powerful. It is in Venice. I think it was specifically put there for the Venice Biennale. But Tech for Impact was created from the willingness of the president of EPFL to actually start or accelerate the university's work as a technical engineering university in order to use our innovation and technology to tackle the sustainable development goals. You might know that these platforms, our centers, are usually linked to business schools and digital humanities, but in terms of technical engineering schools working in this space, it was still a new environment. So 3 years ago, there was a willingness from the president that mandated the vice president of innovation, Mark Gruber, to actually start work at EPFL in this domain. So the big idea, the big vision was to build a Tech for Good hub with EPFL as an epicenter to sort of function as an ecosystem and a platform to sort of mobilize different actors, NGOs, companies, startups, and to really sort of create the next generation of social and responsible tech ventures. How we do this, we don't do this alone. If we have impact as our mission, we need to do it as a collaborative effort. So we establish platforms and collaborations with stakeholders like NGOs and corporations in order to mobilize efforts in this domain. So officially 3 years ago, the Tech for Impact initiative was created at EPFL. We work in 3 different domains. We are an academic institution, so we try and promote and support research at the intersection of technology and social impact. To that purpose, we published a report last April about how all the EPFL research labs are tackling the SDGs. The Showcase 2030 report. If you're interested, I advise you to go look at it on the website. We steer collaborative innovation by harnessing partnerships with both corporates and NGOs. And we try to drive sustainable entrepreneurship in the campus and outside the campus through dedicated programs with students, researchers, and also through events and awareness creation. So as Mael mentioned in the introduction, what does it mean to actually create a Tech for Impact ecosystem and actually bring technologies that are born in Switzerland to the places where they're needed the most? And I'm speaking about emerging and developing markets more in specifics. And I want to tell you more about the Tech for Dev program that I manage that was officially launched in December last year. This is a program in collaboration with the Swiss Development Corporation. So if some of you are researchers or are working in academia, what we try to do with Tech for Dev is we try and drive actionable human-centered research. So we want to harness the innovation and technology coming out of EPFL in order for it to have a tangible and a concrete impact in the Global South. But at the same time, we want to equip NGOs and humanitarian workers with the technology solutions in order to implement and scale these technologies directly on the field. And how we do it, we want to infuse an entrepreneurial innovation concept right from the onset to these collaborative projects. So these three ingredients are sort of the base for the Tech for Dev program. It's all about driving innovation acceleration through what we call a holistic approach. So working with different partners and actually working towards a common mission. Tech for Dev consists in 2 calls for proposals. The second call we officially launched yesterday, which is going to fund another 4 projects. So we'll have a total of 8 collaborative research projects that we fund between EPFL researchers and NGOs. We infuse this business model innovation right from the beginning. So we try and accompany all the researchers and NGOs through dedicated workshops where they look at the business model canvas, for example, as a tool. They look at what is the best market to implement the solution, who their beneficiaries are, in order for them to be as independent as possible after this 2-year grant process, so they can go ahead and actually look for additional funding or actually ideally become an independent social venture. And the last pillar is the education pillar. It's all about student engagement and empowering the next generation of student engineers. And we do this with a program that is based in Bangalore in India, and we're looking to expand this program in Peru when the situation hopefully stabilizes with COVID. So the backbone of a program like Tech for Dev is the NGO Council. It's very much a needs-based program, meaning we source the challenges from the NGOs because they know what technologies are needed and where. They know the needs of the beneficiaries. So we have put together an NGO council, which actually feeds the EPFL researchers specific challenges in the domains of data, access to healthcare, energy, etc. So this is the NGO council as it looks like today. It's continuously growing. We have a total of 23 members, and they, as I said, make the backbone of a program like Tech for Dev. So as I said, it's all about co-creation and human-centered solutions. It's about deploying solutions in a collaborative manner to people that need them the most. And it's about harnessing the EPFL researcher acumen and sort of putting it together with the NGO. Both of them are sort of project leaders, and together they have to sort of test, deploy, and scale technologies in specific contexts. And I'll tell you more about the first 4 projects. It's also about exploring the business models, so exploring the business model innovation from the very start and empowering local actors such as local social entrepreneurs in order to sort of bring this technology at scale in a context which is also different from where it gets originally tested. So these are the Tech for Dev grantees. They're the first 4 collaborative projects that have been funded through the first call. And more specifically, they work in different domains. So the Essential Tech with Klaus and Christine, they're actually developing a new neonatal incubator that withstands power shortages and which is robust, and they want to test it in Kenya. The LPDC and MEDER collaboration is working on a new material for tarpaulin shelters, the blue sheet refugee shelters that you might have seen. They're creating a new material which is sustainable and fully circular, which is made out of cellulose. And they will sort of weave it and produce it locally in Bangladesh in order to test it in Cox's Bazar refugee camp. The picture I showed you right at the beginning. And then the remaining 2, the solar cooking, hydrogen solar cooking project, which is Freddie and Sophia Hausner, which is based in Cameroon and has a partnership with the University of Douala. And then last but not least, the LPAC and Omnis partnership, which works on in Colombia. So they use plastic waste generated in Colombia to generate 3D print devices for people with disabilities. And they have a partnership there also with Universidad de los Andes. So as I said, these are truly scalable and global solutions from Kenya to Colombia to Cameroon and Bangladesh. And we're hopefully looking also to have equal global projects for the next 4 that we will onboard beginning of next year. So what we have done as well, we unfortunately also had to move all our sort of business model innovation workshops completely online. So in doing so, we used a multitude of online tools. The tool that we preferred the most is a tool called Mural, which is extremely interesting and extremely collaborative, especially when you work with different partners around the world. It enables all the project leaders to actually collaborate with one another. And as it's an online tool, it stays throughout time, so the projects can go back and use it whenever they need it. As I said, the social business model canvas is a key tool for each of these projects. You might have seen this model already. What we have done, we have divided it into 4 parts in order to accompany each of the projects in the different testing phases. So what they have to focus on when they are onboarded on the project, during the testing phase, the pre-testing, etc., etc. So we go through the different sections, and my colleague Hilda Lizwani is really leading all the workshops and all the work to this respect. In the end, we have done a total of 4 workshops. We have 16 participants. We have people participating from Cameroon, Colombia. They were entirely online, and we used tools such as the persona grid, the growth scenario, the social business model canvas, etc., etc. Last but not least, the pillar which I find the most exciting, especially because I went on the field with the students and I see how much they learn, is the InSync program. So we sort of bring students to the field, specifically in Bangalore, where together with a local foundation, they actually work to develop solutions to issues which range from housing to education, for example. So this is a program which is a truly interdisciplinary program. So we have students based in engineering, design, and social science. So we have a partnership with the University of Lausanne and the EPFL. We bring them through sort of 14-day design sprints, and each team has to work with different people with different skill sets in order to solve 2 local issues. So the first edition I was in, I accompanied the student. It was all about migrant household conditions and education and learning in slum communities. And our key partner here is Selco Foundation, which is doing some incredible work in the clean energy space in India and abroad. So what we do is we embed the double diamond methodology, the 4D, in order to sort of understand the problem, develop a prototype, test it with the users, and then the students actually present the final prototype, including a video on the proposed solution and usage scenario. So these are some of the participants that were in the first edition of InSync, and you can sort of see what their takeaways were, and they come from different backgrounds, and it's really interesting to see them working in teams with people that have a different skill set to theirs, and which is highly complementary, and it really results in very, very interesting and holistic solutions. These are some of the solutions that they actually worked on. The first one is actually a solution, the double-layered roof housing, which will be implemented by Selco Foundation in order to sort of tackle the smoke problem of these migrant communities in the places where they live. They also worked on a solar panel transitional fan. And also the other 2 remaining groups worked on energy center models, also to address this issue for local street vendors selling fruit and vegetable or flowers, for example. So this is an interesting journey from one of the participants. This is Anais. She participated in the first edition of InSync in February 2019. She then came back at EPFL, did a master thesis, always in the renewable energy space, and then went in and actually co-founded Sun and Go, which is now part of the Climate Launchpad, which got a grant from EPFL. She has now graduated from EPFL, but she's still a social entrepreneur to all effect, and actually doing work in the off-grid solar space, specifically in Malawi. So again, the Tech for Dev program in a nutshell, we have deployed around 600,000 in grants. 40% of this has to be spent in the Global South on the field. We have a total of 16 researchers and NGOs working on collaborative projects in developing countries. We have a total of 22 students that have been on the field, specifically in Bangalore. And for the first edition, we had 30 challenges submitted by our NGO council members. For the second call, I think we have around 40 challenges submitted by the NGO council members. So, coming to the last part of my presentation, and I have to drink a sip of water before that. So last part of my presentation, the most interesting one, in my view, is the lessons learned. So what does it mean to work in such a space? I had the privilege of seeing Tech for Impact grow, because I was sort of the first person to join the team 3 years ago. I've seen the Tech for Dev program grow. It started from a grant proposal. It has become now a full program. So I'm happy to share sort of the lessons with you. And I want to share them using an Iceberg model. We're currently doing a course on systems thinking, which I find incredibly insightful. So I'm not really using the systems thinking methodology here, but I'm taking inspiration from it. So the top of the iceberg is you see the successes, right? You see Tech for Impact, you see Tech for Dev, but everything that lies on the surface is all the hurdles or the challenges that you encounter. For example, many actors in this space, competing goals, failure in a place like Switzerland is really not an option, very different from the US. Many are still working in silos, many are still risk averse, and there is sort of some limited funding. So if I have to really zoom in into the lessons learned with Tech for Dev, I can tell you that a grant proposal can go very, very far. Tech for Dev was born as a grant proposal. Now it's a 3 million funding program in cooperation with the SDC. And we have sort of myself and my colleague Hilda, which are full-time on the program. So if you are, I want to tell everyone that is listening that everything is possible if you really believe in it and you persevere. And the other lesson that I can share with you is be part of something new and be part of something which is not really created yet. I think the most you can learn is when you are part of something from day 0 or day 1. You see something grow, it is challenging, but you really learn a lot. Then maybe a small failure. This is the Swiss Coalition for Humanitarian Innovation, which was a willingness from different Swiss actors, NGOs, foundations, and academic actors to actually come together and really work together as a coalition. We put in a lot of work, a lot of meetings, but unfortunately, because of competing interests and some bureaucracy, it didn't go ahead as planned. And then a personal milestone, which I was very happy to see. I sort of gave my first course with 100% female social venture entrepreneurs. It's trickier in Switzerland to be a female entrepreneur. I was extremely happy to have on this Zoom online class just females as social entrepreneurs. So that is something I think that has to continue. And last but not least, Röstigraben is real. Some of you might know what the Röstigraben is. It's sort of the divide between the German part of Switzerland and the French part of Switzerland. I think a lot still needs to be done in order to bring these two parts together, especially in the Tech for Good, Tech for Impact ecosystem. But I think we are still making some important steps forward. So that is it on my side. If you want to learn more about Tech for Impact or Tech for Dev, you can look at our different social media channels and the website, and happy to answer any questions you might have. And thank you for listening throughout this very long presentation.
Thank you a lot. Thank you a lot, Bea, for this wonderful presentation. Very holistic. Just a quick question, also on my side. You mentioned a project, an initiative, which unfortunately failed due to competing interest. Do you see how do you see, do you see, for example, different ecosystems in the world that do tech for impact, and how do you see them collaborate together? How is it in practice?
Yeah, so thank you for the question, Mael. For the Swiss Coalition for Humanitarian Innovation, we took inspiration from the Dutch Coalition for Humanitarian Innovation, which is extremely interesting and extremely successful in the funding it mobilizes and the stakeholders it mobilizes. I think another academic institution that is doing very good work in this space is MIT with the SOLVE program. So there are different examples of sort of stakeholders coming together for a common goal, both in Europe with the Dutch example and in the US with the MIT SOLVE program through open innovation.
Okay, and the funding for all of these projects, does it come mostly from, I would say, maybe the governments, or does it come from the private sector, mostly venture capital, or is it maybe public-private partnerships? How do you get this funding for all of these projects?
Yeah, so for example, for our Tech for Dev program, this is a matching funding scheme. So we have 1 million which is funded to us from the SDC for the period of 3 years, which is obviously matched funding from the EPFL side. So SDC funds all of the research grants, for example, for the 8 projects. So our project comes from the Swiss government, the SDC in particular. For example, with the MIT Solve, especially when you look at the US, MIT as a university has a different funding structure and as opposed to EPFL. So they get a lot of private sector funding or venture capital funding, so they can actually put in bigger funding pots because of how they are structured. Then public-private partnerships is also a very interesting tool. The World Economic Forum is mobilizing very interesting work in different domains using this model, and it has proven more or less successful throughout time. So let's say in the Swiss example, it's really about either foundations or the Swiss government, the STC in specifics. But it would be great to see sort of impact investors or funds in this space actually putting in and risking more in this domain.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned in your presentation also this big diversity in the teams that have to come together to tackle those big issues. You have local people, you have people from, I guess, also Lausanne, researchers. How is this diversity handled in the projects? Do you have any very specific lesson learned in this regard to really foster the collaboration between those very different people also?
Yeah, so I can give you 2 very specific examples. So let's start with the InSync program with the students. I saw firsthand that an engineer really doesn't like working with a designer or a social scientist because they think differently, they have different mentalities, and they have different goals. So there is a lot of friction at the beginning, but I've seen the learning throughout the 2 weeks that they spend in Bangalore, and they're able to learn so much from one another. They actually continued the work even when they didn't have to once they were back at university. So I think it takes time for students especially to learn from one another and learn how one another can bring sort of a different skill set. But once this cohesion is made, they can really go on and really work on some amazing solutions. Mm-hmm. As for the Tech for Dev program, we have NGOs and researchers working together. These are 2 groups of people that don't necessarily work together. Again, very different mindsets, very different goals. So we're still learning with my colleague Hilda on how to sort of best do this. But what we do is we have a very close coaching and mentoring, and we accompany the projects throughout the 2-year grant. in order to sort of answer any questions they might have, or make space for specific interactions. But we don't have sort of a secret sauce, a secret ingredient. I had a conversation with ETH, and they're like, "Oh, so what is the secret potion to work with NGOs?" I don't have it, but for now we're sort of piloting this new approach, and I think we'll have more lessons learned once we onboard the next 4 project next year.
Okay, and so there is these two-year grants. Then, if I understand correctly, the project is then implemented by the NGO itself. Do you have some sort of a customer service for the NGO so that maybe researchers can join back in if there is a problem with the solution being implemented?
Yeah, so there is not really like a one model fits all. This is very much dependent on the project, the context, and the technology, right? Whether if it's like sort of a technology that requires a lot of R&D, or if it can be tested as soon as comes out of the lab, for example. So usually it's a partnership between the NGO and the researcher in the form of a joint venture. It's a partnership between the NGO, the researcher, and the social enterprise on the ground. We are now sort of at the middle, at the end, nearly at the end of year 1 for the first 4 projects. So unfortunately, because of COVID, they were not able to travel to the field as scheduled, but we hope this can change. But we want to sort of give them all the tools that they need in order for this technology and this sort of venture to stand on its own feet. And we do it also by putting them in contact with local entrepreneurs through networks like Seed Stars, for example, that have very strong local entrepreneurs, specifically in developing markets. So we haven't gotten to this stage yet. Maybe I can check back in a year and tell you what has happened. But for now, they're still in the sort of, they've refined the technology and it's ready to be taken to the field once that is going to be possible.
Wonderful. And so you mentioned Seed Stars. Zooming back into Switzerland, what do you think should be done to really further a more cohesive tech for impact ecosystem here?
Yeah, I think it's very much a team effort, especially if we're in this space. Like I said, there's still many actors working in silos in many different domains, but they're still lacking a sort of unified, cohesive effort towards one mission. I think it's changing. If I've seen the progress since when I started EPFL 3 years ago, there's much more happening in the sector, many more stakeholders working together than before. So I think there needs to be a cohesive effort, and 2, we need also some big funding players. I think entrepreneurs in Switzerland are very lucky in terms of early stage funding, so they can get up to 500,000 in non-dilutive funding if they're just starting out. But once you look for like bigger amounts of funding, a Series A or Series B, then unfortunately Switzerland doesn't have the funds or the players that invest such sums as is the case in London or the US, for example. So we need some bigger players, and we're not missing capital in Switzerland. I think we need someone to stand up and be like, okay, we need to create the first tech for good impact investing fund in Switzerland to fund tech for good ventures. So I think that's my wish to the Swiss ecosystem.
At least we do have capitals here. We just need to know properly how they are handled. So that's a good answer to that. And so we were focusing now on Switzerland, and now I'm talking to you from the University of Geneva, which is a university which of course means students. What advice would you give to students in the audience, or maybe to your 20-year-old self back then?
Yeah, so I interact a lot with students. I was a student myself back in the days. But my first advice is failure is okay. I actually invite everyone to fail or make mistakes as many times in your life as possible. And I don't like the negative connotation associated to a word like failure, but actually in my personal journey so far, failure has been key, and I'm so happy I failed so many times, because because it has helped me get, I think, to where I am today. So really try different things out. You don't need a perfect technology in the perfect market niche. Just go out there, test, and experiment. And it's okay to get things wrong. It's okay to fail. You can start again. So that is sort of the first advice. The second advice: be part of something new. Like I said in the last slide, it's really interesting and amazing to see things develop. I started at Tech for Impact when there was nothing there. Tech for Impact was even called a different name. And I've seen this initiative grow throughout time, and it has been incredibly challenging and insightful and exciting. And that is where your learning curve really goes up. So be part of something new, whether it's a new product, a new startup, or something that still needs to be created. I think you can really learn a lot from that.
Okay, Beatrice. So starting something new. Thank you a lot for this masterclass. I think the time is up. So to everybody currently listening, before we go, I just want to remind you that there is a next masterclass coming up in a few minutes at 10:45, which will be on the evolution of culture and entertainment industries. So here we will go in a different world. The masterclass will be given by Umar Torre Franzen, which is an associate in Geneva music label called Colors Records, and also the co-founder of The Spot Geneva. So here we will really look at this industry that is currently moving and changing a lot. But before that, just give us some time to have a quick break and get the setup ready for the next masterclass. Beatrice, thank you a lot for joining in, and we see you soon.
Thank you, Maël. It was a pleasure.
Bye-bye.